CBC Television is a Canadian broadcast television network that is owned by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the national public broadcaster. The network began operations on September 6, 1952. Its French-language counterpart is Ici Radio-Canada Télé.Headquartered. Headquartered in Toronto, CBC Television is available through over-the-air television stations across Canada, many of which are owned by the CBC. Almost all of the CBC's programming is produced in Canada. Although CBC Television is supported by public funding, commercial advertising revenue supplements the network. In contrast to CBC Radio and public broadcasters from several other countries which are commercial-free. Overview: CBC Television provides a complete 24-hour network schedule of news, sports, entertainment and children's programming in most cases, feeding the same programming at the same local times nationwide, except to the Newfoundland time zone, where programs air 30 minutes late. On October 9, 2006 at 6:00 a.m., the network switched to a 24-hour schedule, becoming one of the last major English-language broadcasters to transition to such a schedule. Most CBC-owned stations previously signed off the air during the early morning hours, instead of the infomercials aired by most private stations, or a simulcast of CBC News Network in the style of BBC One's nightly simulcast of BBC News Channel. The CBC uses the time-to-air repeats, including local news, prime-time series, movies and other programming from the CBC library. Its French counterpart, Ici Radio-Canada Télé.Headquartered, still signs off every night. While historically there has been room for regional differences in the schedule, as there is today for CBC-owned stations, funding has decreased to the point that most of these stations only broadcast 30 to 90 minutes a day of locally produced newscasts, and usually no other local programming. Until 1998, the network carried a variety of American programs in addition to its core Canadian programming, directly competing with private Canadian broadcasters such as CTV and Global. Since then, it has restricted itself to Canadian programs, a handful of British programs, and a few American movies and off-network repeats. Since this change, the CBC has sometimes struggled to maintain ratings comparable to those it achieved before 1995, although it has seen somewhat of a ratings resurgence in recent years. In the 2007-08 season, popular series such as Little Mosque on the Prairie and The Border helped the network achieve its strongest ratings performance in over half a decade. In 2002, CBC Television and CBC News Network became the first broadcasters in Canada that are required to provide closed captioning for all of their programming. On those networks, only outside commercials need not be captioned, though a bare majority of them are aired with captions. All shows, bumpers, billboards, promos and other internal programming must be captioned. The requirement stems from a human rights complaint filed by deaf lawyer Henry V. Lug, which was settled in 2002. Under the CBC's current arrangement with Rogers Communications for National Hockey League broadcast rights, Hockey Night in Canada broadcasts on CBC-owned stations and affiliates are not technically aired over the CBC television network, but over a separate CRTC-licensed part-time network operated by Rogers. This was required by the CRTC as Rogers exercises editorial control and sells all advertising time during the HNIC broadcasts, even though the CBC bug and promos for other CBC television programs appear throughout HNIC programming. News and current affairs. The CBC's flagship newscast, The National, airs Sunday through Fridays at 10 o'clock p.m. Est and Saturdays at 6 o'clock p.m. Est. Until October 2006, CBC-owned and operated stations aired a second broadcast of the program at 11 o'clock p.m. This later broadcast included only the main news portion of the program, and excluded the analysis and documentary segment. This second airing was later replaced with other programming, and as of the 2012-13 television season, was replaced on CBC's major market stations by a half-hour late newscast. There is also a short news update, at most on late Saturday evenings. During hockey season, this update is usually found during the first intermission of the second game of the doubleheader on Hockey Night in Canada. In addition to the mentioned late local newscasts, CBC stations in most markets fill early evenings with local news programs, generally from 5 o'clock p.m. to 6:30 p.m., while most stations also air a single local newscast on weekend evenings. Other newscasts include parts of CBC News Now airing weekday at 6 o'clock a.m. and noon. Weekly news magazine The Fifth of State is also a CBC mainstay, as a documentary series such as Doc Zone. Sports. One of the most popular shows on CBC television is the weekly Saturday night broadcast of NHL hockey games, Hockey Night in Canada. It has been televised by the network since 1952. During the NHL lockout and subsequent cancellation of the 2004-2005 hockey season, CBC instead aired various recent and classic movies branded as Movie Night in Canada on Saturday nights. Many cultural groups criticized this and suggested the CBC air games from minor hockey leagues. The CBC responded that most such broadcast rights were already held by other groups, but it did base each movie night broadcast from a different Canadian hockey venue. Other than hockey, CBC sports properties include Toronto Raptors basketball, Toronto FC soccer, and various other amateur and professional events. It was also the exclusive carrier of Canadian Curling Association events during the 2004-2005 season. Due to disappointing results and fan outrage over many draws being carried on CBC Country Canada, the association tried to cancel its multi-year deal with the CBC signed in 2004. After the CBC threatened legal action, both sides eventually came to an agreement under which early round rights reverted to TSN. On June 15, 2006, the CCA announced that TSN would obtain exclusive rights to curling broadcasts in Canada as of the 2008-09 season, shutting the CBC out of the championship weekend for the first time in 40-plus years. CBC Sports suffered another major blow when it was announced that after the 2007 season, the CFL regular season games and the Grey Cup would be moving to TSN, ending the CBC's tenure with the CFL. It has been stated that the CFL was not happy with the CBC's lackluster production during the CBC's 2005 union lockout, which forced the network to use CBC management to work the behind-the-scenes telecast and use stadium public address announcers in place of their regular announcer crew. On June 23, 2007, the network aired the first game in a two-year deal to broadcast Toronto Blue Jays games. The contract ended at the end of the 2008 season, and was not renewed. In August 2007, it was also announced that the CBC would broadcast National Basketball Association games involving the Toronto Raptors, starting with the 2007-08 NBA season, through at least 2009-2010 2010. The CBC would carry games for the 2007, 2008 and 20 games for the 2008, 2009 and 2009-2010 seasons. In November 2013, the NHL announced that it had signed a $5.2 billion deal with Rogers Communications, giving them exclusive rights for 12 years starting in 2014-2015. CBC has been sub-licensed to carry NHL games for the first 4 years of the contract. As a result of funding reductions from the federal government and decreased revenues, in April 2014, CBC announced it would no longer bid for professional sport broadcasting rights. Entertainment. Among CBC Television's best-known primetime series, a comedy series, Rick Mercer Report is This Hour has 22 Minutes and Little Mosque on the Prairie, and dramas such as The Tudors, Heartland and Intelligence. In recent years, British series such as Coronation Street and Doctor Who have been given greater prominence. As noted above, it now carries very little American programming apart from some syndicated daytime shows. In 2006, the CBC announced radical changes to its primetime lineup, including the following new series to premiere that fall: Dragon's Den, Intelligence, Roomies, Underdogs, Josie H., The One, Making a Music Star, 72 Hours, True Crime. Repeats of the hour on the main CBC network. Many were surprised by these changes to the CBC schedule, which were apparently intended to attract a younger audience to the network. Some suggested they might alienate the core CBC viewership. Another note of criticism was made when the network decided to move the national in some time zones to simulcast the American version of The One over the summer. This later became a moot point, as The One was taken off the air after 2 weeks after extremely low American and Canadian ratings, and a newscast resumed its regular schedule. In 2006, daytime programming was also revamped. While there were still repeats of CBC in foreign series, new talk shows such as The Gil Deacon Show and the regional franchise Living were added. The Gil Deacon Show was cancelled after just 7 months, and replaced with another talk show, Stephen and Chris, which is still on the air today. Living was cancelled in August 2009. On January 9, 2007, the CBC began airing a highly publicized new series called Little Mosque on the Prairie, a comedy about a Muslim family living in rural Saskatchewan. The series garnered strong ratings as well as international media attention. It was also announced that Martha Stewart's daytime show would be added to the CBC daytime lineup, with the nighttime Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy! Following in on September 2008. In January 2008, CBC Television launched the drama series The Border, MVP and J-Pod, the reality series The Week the Women Went, and the comedy Sophie. Only The Border and Sophie were renewed for a second season in the fall of 2008. The new series, being Erica and Wild Roses, began airing in January 2009. Beginning in 2005, the CBC has contributed production funds for the BBC Wales revival of Doctor Who, for which it received a special credit at the end of each episode. This arrangement continued until the end of 4th season, broadcast in 2008. The CBC similarly contributed to the first season of the spin-off series, Torchwood. More recently, the network has also begun picking up Canadian rights to some Australian series, including the drama series Janet King and Love Child, and the comedy drama series Please Like Me. Children's programming. Children's programming are often marketed as Kids CBC, and the outlet occupies most of the morning hours on weekdays and much of weekend mornings. CBC HD. On March 5, 2005, CBC Television launched a high-definition simulcast of its Toronto and Montreal stations. Since that time, the network has also launched HD simulcasts in Vancouver, Ottawa, Edmonton, Calgary, Halifax, Windsor, Winnipeg and St. John's. CBC HD is available nationally via satellite non-digital cable as well as for free over-the-air using a regular TV antenna and a digital tuner. On the following channels, all HD channels map to their analog positions via the North American PSIP virtual channeling standard. In fall 2007, the CBC upgraded its Toronto facilities, becoming the second fully HD news broadcaster in Canada. The national and all its news programs originating from the same news studio in Toronto are now available in HD. On September 1, 2011, as part of the analog television shut-off and digital conversion, all CBC over-the-air HD broadcasts switched from the 1080i to 720p resolution format. In August 2012, after the CBC shut down all of the remaining analog transmitters, CBC Television began broadcasting all programming solely in the 16:9 aspect ratio and began letterboxing its widescreen feed for standard definition viewers, just as Ici Radio-Canada Télé.Headquartered has done since September 2007. Stations. Most CBC television stations, including those in the major cities, are owned and operated by the CBC itself. CBC-O and AMP-O stations operate as a mostly seamless national service with few deviations from the main network schedule, although there are some regional differences from time to time. For on-air identification, most CBC stations use the CBC brand rather than their call letters, not identifying themselves specifically until sign-on or sign-off. All CBC-O and AMP-O stations have a standard call letter naming convention, in that the first two letters are CB and the last letter is T. Only the third letter varies from market to market. However, that letter is typically the same as the third letter of the CBC Radio 1 and CBC Radio 2 stations in the same market. An exception to this rule are the CBC North stations in Yellowknife, Whitehorse and Nicolet, whose call signs begin with CF due to the historic association with the CBC's Frontier coverage package prior to the advent of microwave and satellite broadcasting. Some stations that broadcast from smaller cities are private affiliates of the CBC, that is, stations which are owned by commercial broadcasters but predominantly incorporate CBC programming within the schedules. Such stations generally follow the CBC schedule, airing a minimum 40 hours per week of network programming. However, they may opt out of some CBC programming in order to air locally produced programs. Syndicated series are programs purchased from other broadcasters, such as CTV2, which do not have a broadcast outlet in the same market. In these cases, the CBC programming being displaced may be broadcast at a different time than the network, or may not be broadcast on the station at all. Most private affiliates generally opt out of CBC's afternoon schedule and Thursday night arts programming. Private affiliates carry the 10 p.m. broadcast of the National as a core part of the CBC schedule, but generally omitted the 11 p.m. repeat. Most private affiliates produce their own local newscasts for a duration of at least 35 minutes. Some of the private affiliates have begun adding CBC's overnight programming to the schedules since the network began broadcasting 24 hours a day. Private CBC affiliates are not as common as they were in the past, as many such stations have been purchased either by the CBC itself or by West Global or Chum Limited, respectively, becoming E or A channel stations. One private CBC affiliate, CHBC TV in Kelowna, joined E on February 27, 2006. When a private CBC affiliate re-affiliates with another network, the CBC has normally added a retransmitter of its nearest owned AMPO station to ensure that CBC service is continued. However, due to an agreement between CHBC and CFJC-TV in Kamloops, CFJC also disaffiliated from the CBC on February 27, 2006, but no retransmitters were installed in the license area. Former private CBC affiliate CKPG-TV Prince George and Chat TV Medicine had disaffiliated on August 31, 2008 and joined E, but the CBC announced it will not add new retransmitters to these areas. Incidentally, CFJC, CKPG and Chat are all owned by an independent media company, Jim Pattison Group. With the closure of E and other changes in the media landscape, several former CBC affiliates have since joined Citia Global or closed altogether, according to filings to the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission by Thunder Bay Electronics and Bell Media. The CBC informed them that it will not extend its association with any of its private affiliates beyond August 31, 2011. Incidentally, that was also the date for analog to digital transition in Canada. Given recent practice and the CBC's decision not to convert any retransmitters to digital, even in markets with populations in the hundreds in thousands, it is not expected that the CBC will open new transmitters to replace its affiliates, and indeed may pare back its existing transmitter network. However, in March 2011, CKPR announced that it had come to a programming agreement with the CBC, in which the station will continue to provide CBC programming in Thunder Bay for a period of 5 years. On March 16, 2012, Astral Media announced the sale of its assets to Bell Media, owners of CTV and CTV2, for $3.38 billion, with CFDK and CJDC included in the acquisition. Whether the stations will remain CBC affiliates or become owned and operated stations of CTV or CTV2 following the completion of the merger is undetermined. CBC television stations in Nunavut, the Northwest Territories and Yukon, branded as CBC North, tailor the programming mostly to the local native population, and broadcast in many native languages such as Inuktitut, Gwich'in and Dene. CBC Television Worldwide. Carriage of CBC News. From 1994 through July 2005, CBC Television's news programming was aired in the United States on News World International. On September 11, 2001, several American broadcasters without their own news operations, including C-SPAN, carried the CBC's coverage of the terror attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C. In the days after September 11, C-SPAN carried CBC's nightly newscast, The National, anchored by Peter Mansbridge. C-SPAN has also carried CBC's coverage of major events affecting Canadians, among them the Canadian federal elections. 6 days in September 2000 that marked the death and state funeral of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. The war in Iraq. The National aired on C-SPAN each night for about 3 weeks following the attacks on Iraq. Peter Mansbridge signed off his broadcasts during that time, saying, "I'm Peter Mansbridge. Thanks for watching. Those of you here in Canada, and viewers across the United States watching this on C-SPAN." The power outage crisis in summer 2003. Key proceedings in Canadian Parliament, such as state openings, U.S. presidential elections. In 2004, C-SPAN picked up the National the day after the election for the view from Canadians. State unofficial visits of American presidents to Canada. During MSNBC's coverage of President George W. Bush's visit to Canada, CBC's senior parliamentary editor, Don Newman, appeared on MSNBC. Several PBS stations also air some CBC programs, especially The Red Green Show, although no CBC programming currently airs on the full network schedule. For a number of years CBC co-produced a news program, Hemispheres, with Australia's national broadcaster, the ABC. The program was hosted from Sydney and Vancouver and included reports from both networks' foreign correspondents. It was broadcast in both Canada and Australia and across Asia and the Pacific on the Australia network. Border audiences. CBC television stations can be received in many United States communities along the Canada-US border over the air and have a significant audience in those areas. Such a phenomenon can also take place within Great Lakes communities such as Ashtabula, Ohio, which receive programming from the CBC's London, Ontario transmitter, based upon prevailing atmospheric conditions over Lake Erie. As of September 2010, CBC shut down its analog transmitter and decided not to replace it with a digital transmitter. As a result, there is now a giant hole in the coverage of CBC in southwestern Ontario. Both CBC Toronto and CBC Windsor are over 100 miles from London, on and out of range for even the largest antennas. CBC's sports coverage has also attained high viewership in border markets, including its coverage of the NHL's Stanley Cup playoffs, which was generally considered to be more complete and consistent than coverage by other networks such as NBC. Its coverage of the Olympic Games also found a significant audience in border regions, primarily due to the fact that CBC aired more events live than NBC's coverage, which had been criticized in recent years for tape delaying events to air in prime time, even if the event is being held in a market in the Pacific time zone during prime time hours on the East. Southeastern Michigan and Northern Ohio receive local Windsor CBC-owned stations CBET-DET over the air and on local cable providers, such as Bright House Networks, WOW, Charter Communications, Comcast and Buckeye Cable System. The station can also be seen as far as Cleveland, Ohio, with a strong antenna. Montreal CBCO and AMP-O stations CBMT-DET can be seen on various cable systems in the northern parts of Michigan, Wisconsin and Minnesota, including charter cable systems in Michigan cities like Alpena, Bay City, Midland, Mount Pleasant, Houghton and Marquette. In Maine, Time Warner Cable carries CBMT in Bangor. Cable viewers along the border can receive CBAT-DET. The Bangor Daily News carries listings for CBAT. In Northwest Washington State, CBCO and AMP-O station CBUT-DET is distributed to almost 1 million Comcast cable subscribers in Seattle, Bellevue, Tacoma, Olympia and Everett. In the Champlain Valley of northern upstate New York and Vermont, local cable systems in Plattsburgh, New York and Burlington, Vermont carries CBMT. Many cable providers in northern Minnesota and northern North Dakota carry Winnebago and AMP-O CBWT-DET, including the cities of Grand Forks, Crookston and Bemidji. Cable providers in the Buffalo, New York area carry Toronto and AMP-OCB Ltd. The analog signal was also easily receivable via antenna as far south as Cattaraugus County, and some communities in Niagara County can receive the HD feed via an antenna. The Sunny Oswego campus cable system carried the network's former Kingston affiliate CKWS-TV. On public cable systems, Time Warner carries CKWS in Jefferson and western St. Lawrence counties, and as far south as Utica. As of September 2015, however, CKWS is now an affiliate of CTV. In eastern St. Lawrence County, CBCO and AMP-OCB from Ottawa is carried instead. Some communities in the U.S., such as Alexandria, Minnesota, offer CBC North on low-powered repeaters, courtesy of the local television association. Caribbean and Bermuda. Several Caribbean nations carry feeds of CBC Television. Bahamas, on the Coral Wave TV system in the northern Bahamas. Barbados, on the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation Multi-Choice TV cable system. Bermuda, on the Cablevision Digital Cable Services Variety Tier. Trinidad and Tobago, on the Columbus Communications Trinidad Limited TV system. Jamaica, on the Columbus Communications Jamaica Limited